And he uses a metaphor, God uses a metaphor. It's a sexually aroused predatory cat. And you invite it in. You invite it in. You know that it has evil intent. You invite it in to mate with you, right? And its union with you, this malevolent force, its sexual union with you has produced an offspring. And that offspring is what possesses you. And so not only have you done something wrong, you've invited the spirit of wrongdoing into your life, and you've creatively intermingled it with it voluntarily to bring forth a monster of your own creation. So that's what God tells Cain. It's like, look, it's bad enough that God says, you know, you should get your act together, because maybe that's why things aren't going so well for you. Before you criticize the transcendent and the world and the structure of being, maybe you're doing something wrong. But it's worse than that. He says, not only are you doing something wrong, you bloody well know you're doing something wrong, and you're doing it creatively and with intent. So not only are things not going well for you, but you've played a creative role in producing that situation. And so God basically says, I am taking zero responsibility for rejecting your sacrifice. It's all on you. And so Cain leaves, and he's like seriously not happy with that response, because he wanted to hear, pat, pat, you're a victim of circumstance and everything's conspiring against you, and really, being God, I should get my act together and just give you what you want, because obviously, being God, I'm wrong and you're right. Well, that isn't what happens. It's exactly the opposite of that. It's completely on you. That's the judgment. And so Cain leaves, and believe me, he was wroth before, and his countenance had fallen before, but it's nothing like it is now. And so he hits the next stage, and he thinks, okay, I'm going to take my revenge. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to find the most innocent and worthwhile thing that's favored of God, and I'm going to kill it. And that's what he does. So, and it doesn't matter that it's his brother. And Abel, you know, we're drawing the inference, Abel's done the right things, everyone likes him, everything's flourishing for Abel, he's a good guy. He's one of those people that you meet that has everything, and then you meet them and you wish you could hate them, but you can't, because they're really good people, and then you really hate them, because not only do they have everything, but it appears that they deserve it. And there's nothing that sort of sits in your soul and rots it more than that realization. And so that's the situation with Cain. And so Cain thinks, Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him. So that's so interesting, because look what happens to Cain here. So he's not doing well, he's separated from the transcendent and from society, he's bitterly resentful, and now he goes out and kills the very thing that he most wants to be. So he destroys his own ideal, right? He demolishes his own ideal. That's how far his resentment has pushed him. And so he's done, right? But it doesn't matter, because it enables him to take revenge. So he doesn't care. It's like the suicidal school shooter that blows off his head at the end of his mayhem. It's like, it doesn't matter to him. It's part of the same art form. And the Lord says unto Cain, where is Abel thy brother? And Cain said, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? Well, that's a good question. That's why it's posed in the story, because the answer to that is supposed to be yes. And God says, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries unto me from the ground. That's actually the motif that Dostoevsky explores, I would say, in Crime and Punishment, because what happens is that Raskolnikov is Cain for all intents and purposes, and he commits a murder, but he gets away with it. Well, so he thinks. So he thinks. No one suspects him. He buries the money. He can't stand to touch the money. He buries it in an abandoned lot, and he's drawn there now and then to look at where it is, but he can't touch it, because the money, it's so funny, because the money before he kills the pawnbroker is not the same as the money after he kills the pawnbroker. And the Raskolnikov before he kills the pawnbroker is not the same as the Raskolnikov after he kills the pawnbroker. In fact, they're not the same at all. And so Raskolnikov is tormented by God, you could say, but not from the external world. He sets the crime up quite nicely. It's that the spirit against which he transgressed tortures him from within. And there's no escape from it. And so eventually what happens in Crime and Punishment is Raskolnikov continues to manifest himself as guilty in every possible way until he receives the punishment that he desires, because it's the only way that he can set things right. He essentially turns himself in. eventually, because he can't tolerate what he's done. So, well, so that's the idea. Thy voice of thy brother's blood cries unto me from the ground. It's guilt. And now you're cursed from the earth, which has opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. When you till the ground, it will not henceforth yield unto you its strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shall thou be in the earth. You know, and you might say, well, why does God not just strike Cain dead? And the answer to that perhaps is that wouldn't be sufficient punishment. And that's what it looks like to me. It's like, what's the punishment? You live with what you did. Right? And I don't want anybody taking you out either, because then you won't have to live with what you did. So that's the punishment. And Cain says unto the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. It's like, yeah. Behold, you have driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid. It's the same as what happens to Adam in the Garden of Eden. Remember, Adam hides from God, and he has his reasons. And now Cain is alienated from God. There's no reconstructing that relationship. He's put himself, by violating his contract, let's say with the transcendent, and also with society, and also with his own spirit, he's put himself outside the possibility of redemption. And that's why he says, the punishment is greater than I can bear. There's no hope left, right? So he's in hell for all intents and purposes. Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid, and I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth. And it shall come to pass that everyone who finds me will kill me. And God says, therefore whoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark unto Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. Now that's interesting. You think, why in the world would God protect Cain? Well, the next part of the story actually tells you that. You have a family, I have a family. Your brother kills my son. So what do? I come and I kill your father and your cousin. And then you think, well, I killed your father and your cousin. I'm going to come back and I'm going to kill 4 of your people. And then I come back and say, yeah, no problem. It's 16 of you this time. And then you come back and you say, 16, eh? Let's try for 32. And so this is what happens. This is actually why justice systems are set up, by the way. There's a bunch of reasons justice systems are set up. And one is to punish the guilty. That's one. The other is to have the guilty repent. That's 2. To maintain social order. That's 3. Here's another one that no one ever thinks about. Back 30 years ago, the governor of Massachusetts, whose name I forget, was running for president. And while he was governor of Massachusetts, he had released a number of prisoners, one of whom his name was, I think, Willie, maybe Horton. Doesn't really matter. And when Willie was released on this program, he went out and raped someone and perhaps killed them. I can't remember, but it doesn't matter. The rape is good enough. And the governor was asked during a debate what he would do if a released prisoner had raped his daughter or his wife. And he gave a very weak answer. What was his name? He gave a very weak answer of something about, you know, letting the law take its due course. And that's the wrong answer, right? The right answer is, I would be compelled with every fiber of my being to hunt that person down and to tear him into bits. But I won't do it. Now, so what's the purpose of the justice system? It's to alleviate you from the responsibility of revenge. That's what it's for. Because otherwise, what happens? You kill 1, I kill 2. You kill 4, I kill 8. You kill 16. And soon, everyone's at war. And so God protects Cain to stop that from happening, to stop the feud from emerging, because those things can go forever, and then from transforming the entire society into a state of war. And so what's also, so I'll tell you the rest of the story. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch, etc. So now you have a genealogy, right? So Cain starts to have a family. You have a genealogy. And so a number of people are named in the lineage. And it tells you what, this is sort of an attempt to describe how things came about. So this is like the naming of the heroes of old. And so you have Enoch, who builds a city. You have Jabal, who is the father of those who dwell in tents and of those who have cattle. You have Jubal, who is the father of musicians, and Zillah, who bore Tubal-Cain. Now, Tubal-Cain is a very interesting person. By tradition, Tubal-Cain is the first artificer of weapons of war. So Cain's descendant, after multiple generations, is the person who produces weapons of war. All right, and so there's another bit of the story within which that needs to be placed in context. And Lamech, who's one of the grandchildren of Cain, says unto his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice, you wives of Lamech, hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. Okay, so what he's saying is he's been involved in a murder. If Cain be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. And so there's the implication there that the tit-for-tat process has begun. Cain kills Abel. Cain's children kill 7. Cain's grandchildren kill 70-fold. And then Tubal-Cain pops up on the horizon, and he's the person who makes artifices of war. And so the story, in its fragmentary manner, ties the individual psychopathology that's resentful and revenge-seeking to the proclivity for broad-scale warfare. And this really hit me because I was interested particularly in what was happening in the Nazi camps with the guards. Because the guards were gratuitously cruel. And I was very curious about that. And so here's an interesting story. This was in a book called Ordinary Germans, Hitler's Willing Executioners. And it was a book that was written about 30 years ago that challenged the idea that the Nazi phenomena was top-down order following, which I don't believe, by the way. I think that that's a very weak hypothesis. Fascistic societies are fascistic at every single level of organization. Spiritually, within the family, within the local community, it's like a holograph. It's the same absolutely everywhere. It's not top down. I mean, there are leaders who get produced and maybe they catalyze it, but to blame it on the leaders is to forget about the process by which the leaders come to be. So no, you don't get a pass that way. So here's one of the things that happened. As the Nazis started to lose the war. So here's what you should have done if you were a Nazi and you wanted to win the war. You should have enslaved the Jews and the Gypsies and had them work, right? You should have had them work for the benefit of the victory. And then if you wanted to, you liquidate them afterwards. That's the logical thing to do if you want to win. And we assume that Hitler wanted to win. But that's not a very intelligent assumption. Why would you assume that? He wasn't exactly a good guy. So why should we assume that he was aiming at the good that he was promoting, even in his own terms, right? The glorious, everlasting Third Reich, right? That'll rule for 1,000 years and be a bastion of civilization and music, because that's the sort of thing he purported to be interested in. Well, so what do you do with the Jews and the Gypsies? Well, round them up, fine. Enslave them, fine. You don't kill them. You certainly don't devote a substantial proportion of your war resources while you're losing to accelerate the rate at which the extermination is taking place. Because that's a bit counterproductive, unless what you're aiming at is the maximum possible mayhem in the shortest period of time. Well, so what happened as the Germans started to lose the war? Did Hitler lose faith in his own ability? No, he believed that the Germans had betrayed him with weakness. And so he was perfectly willing to accelerate the rate at which Germany was losing the war. And so when Hitler and his minions had the choice, here's the choice. You can suspend your unnecessary demolition of people, win the damn war, and then pick it up afterwards. Or while you're losing, you can just accelerate the mayhem even though it's counterproductive. It's like, what'd they pick? Well, they picked to accelerate the mayhem. And so to me, there's an old psychoanalytic idea. I think this was derived by Jung. If you can't figure out what someone is doing or why, look at the outcome and infer the motivation. If it produces mayhem, perhaps it was aiming at mayhem. Now, you have to use that dictum carefully. If someone's irritating you, maybe it's because you're irritable and you should sort yourself out, but maybe it's because they're actually aiming at irritating you. And that's the actual motivation. So perhaps not, but it's another tool in your analytical armament. So, and so you see, well, and this is the thing about warfare that's so interesting about because you can attribute it to territoriality.